Yeah, I'm going to freak out. I'm going to glitch. I'm going to lose it. Oh, what do the kids say? I'm going to crash out. Okay? All right, you guys, welcome back to Killer Queens. I'm Torella, and I've got another true crime case for you today. This one is the case of Kitty Genovese, which also happens to be the implementation of 911. We are going to talk a lot about the bystander effect. There's a lot that goes into this case, all of it absolutely horrific. So let's get into it. I do want to give a hey girl thanks to Molly Lucas, Marcia Glorioso, Molly Elizabeth, Heather from Nashville, hey, and Des Hunt for requesting this case. And hey girl thanks to Beth for writing this one up for us. All right, so let's do a little overview here. On March 13th, 1964, 28-year-old Kitty Genovese was heading home from work in the early morning hours. After parking her car, she was making the short walk to her apartment when she heard footsteps behind her. When she started to run away, the man followed her and he attacked. After someone saw them and yelled out, the attacker, thank goodness, left. Except he came back and he attacked her for a second time. Though there were several witnesses who heard something, only 2 had made a call to the police. The amount of witnesses in this case were exaggerated. Facts were inaccurately reported. But Kitty's death has resulted in several studies, laws, and the unified 911 system. So there was a lot of inaccuracies leading up to these things, but it's like some positive did still come from it. Let's talk about Kitty's background. Catherine Susan, who went by Kitty Genovese, was born on July the 7th, 1935 to Vincent and Rachel Genovese in Brooklyn, New York. Vincent ran Bay Ridge Coat and Apron Supply Company, and then Rachel was a stay-at-home mother or homemaker to Kitty and her 4 younger siblings. The family lived in a 4-family row house in an Irish and Italian working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn. Kitty was always full of energy. She had a zest for life. She was popular in school, and her favorite subjects were English and music. During her senior year, she was elected the class cut-up at Prospect Heights, which was an all-girls school, and she graduated in 1953. After Kitty graduated, her family moved to New Canaan, Connecticut, after her mother had witnessed a murder. However, at this point, Kitty was old enough to make her own choice about where she wanted to live, and she decided to stay behind in New York. She stayed back with her grandparents and prepared to marry her high school boyfriend, get a load of this name, Rocco Anthony Fazzolari, I think. What a New York name. Like, I've never been there, but that feels so New York to me. It's fantastic. Rocco was an Army officer and engineer, so they married on October the 31st, 1954. But they did later get a divorce, and Kitty stayed in New York after that. She was working as a secretary, she worked as a waitress, a hostess, and a barmaid before finally settling into a manager position at Ev's 11th Hour in Hollis, Queens. Kitty was said to be reliable. She was a hardworking employee. She would often work double shifts. And not that you would only work double shifts because you're making really good money, but Kitty was making really good money. She was making about $750 a month, which is approximately $9,800 a month today. Holy moly. But she was saving her money to open her own Italian restaurant. Oh. So while living in New York, Kitty would drive to Connecticut every other weekend or so to visit with her family. Her brother, William, said that he remembers her in her red Fiat that she would let him drive because at that time he was just 15. His given name was William. He went by Bill. They were 12 years apart in age, but they were still close. And Bill says, quote, "I just really loved the hell out of Kitty. We would laugh a lot together. Slowly but surely in my mind, it became like, man, we have to tell people what she was like. She was pretty extraordinary. For lack of a better term, she was a real pistol." Kitty met Marianne Zelenko on March 13th, 1963, at an underground lesbian bar called Swing Rendezvous in Greenwich Village. The two quickly fell in love. They made the decision to move in together, which my lesbian friends say is what lesbians do. It's like a joke that they move in really quickly together. At least that's what they told me, so I don't know. So they did. They moved in together, and they found an apartment next to the Long Island Railroad Station in Kew Gardens, which is a neighborhood in Queens. So they settled into a second-floor apartment, which was one of 14 units in a two-story building, and they had storefronts on the ground floor, and then apartments were on the second floor. And from all accounts, Kitty and Marianne were super happy. Of course, at this time, they had to hide their relationship. They had to just be roommates. I think there were obviously some people that knew they were together, but for the most part, it was, oh, this is my roommate, because people suck. So it sounded like they were really, really happy. On the morning of March 13th, 1964, around 3 a.m., that's like exactly to the day of when she met Marianne. Jeez. So on that morning, Kitty left work. She was excited to head home and celebrate her anniversary with Marianne. I knew it was their anniversary, but I did not put together until I'm saying it out loud that it was the anniversary of them meeting, not like another anniversary. Oh my gosh, it's so sad. Kitty parked her car by the rail station, and then she started her walk to the apartment. So there was like an area of parking. Now, I live in Tennessee. You park where you live in Tennessee. In Nashville, you might have to do street parking, but usually you're still really close. But like everywhere else, you park where you live. It's a thing. Or you park where you're going, Again, if you're going like downtown Nashville, you might have to park in like a lot and then walk to where you're going or whatever. But a lot of places still have parking. It was not until I moved to Hollywood, California, when I was just a wee baby at 20 years old. Well, I turned 21 on the drive over there. Anyway, that I realized that there were places that didn't have parking at the places that you went. And so I got a job at this cruise line, Crystal Cruises, shout out. And they're like a luxury cruise line. And I was like an inside salesperson. I don't know. I was very young and they hired me and it was fantastic. But it was in Century City. And so I had to drive, obviously, to work. Well, I guess I didn't have to. I took the bus for a little while. That took like 3 hours every day. It was ridiculous. Anyway, so I did drive, but I had to pay to park where I worked. I had never seen such. I had never heard of such. I was like, excuse me? I have to pay for parking where I work? So the garage, and you got like a parking allowance the longer you were there. So I think my parking allowance was like $50 a month because I was just starting. And if I wanted to park in the building that I worked in, like in the garage, like underground, it was $350 a month for it to be covered. So I found a parking lot that was like, I don't even remember, several blocks away. And it was not covered, but it was like $150 a month. So it was a lot cheaper. And it wasn't covered, but it really didn't matter because it never rains there, ever. It rained one time in the 6 months I lived there, and it was overnight. I never even saw the rain. I just saw that the street was wet when I woke up the next morning. So anyway, I couldn't believe that. That is crazy. So anyway, she had a lot that she had to park in. You couldn't park right at your apartment. All the things. This is city life. I'm not cut out for that kind of thing. Okay. So she's making her way to her apartment after she parks her car over here. So like her apartment would just be like straight down this way. But she would have to go a little bit. So she's walking and then she hears footsteps behind her. And I'm guessing she turns to look and is like, okay. I mean, I'm not going to say this only happens to women, of course, but I can comfortably say that most women know that feeling where like you're walking and you're by yourself. It can be in the day. It can be in the grocery store. It can be in Target. Our safe space. It's supposed to be Target, but it happens there. Publix, another one. Like, what a joy to be at. It can happen there. You know what I'm saying? So like you notice somebody's behind you, you notice they're following and you're like, So you start to walk a little faster. Well, he picks up his pace. Okay, now you're fucking terrified, right? So she starts running and he runs. which is like, oh my gosh. So he catches up to her and he just starts stabbing her. And she's yelling out that she's been stabbed. She's screaming, help me, help me, help me, like I've been stabbed. So a neighbor named Robert Moser saw the struggle and he opens his window and says, hey, leave that girl alone. And so the attacker was like, oh shit, I've been seen. So he runs away. Great. So Kitty gets up and she walks around the corner. But she's struggling. She's been stabbed. She's losing blood. I don't want to say in and out of it at that point because I'm not totally sure, but she's having a hard time, right? But that's okay, right? Because this guy yelled at him and told him to go away, and the police are going to be there soon, and an ambulance is going to be there soon, right? I wish it were so simple. This whole case, and I'm not trying to be funny, but what I'm trying to parallel is the absurdity. But this reminds me of the scene in The 40-Year-Old Virgin where, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget her name, Catherine. Oh my gosh, I love her, Catherine. She was married to Dermot Mulroney. What did I say? She was married to Dermot Mulroney for like a long time. Oh my gosh, Catherine what? She's fantastic. Anyway, her character in the movie, she runs that buy it on eBay store or whatever. And I believe it's Jonah Hill that plays the kid who comes in and is like, hello, I'd like to buy these boots. And she's like, oh, eek, oof, gosh. Okay. Man, I wish it was that simple. He's like, what? She's like, we got to go on eBay. And I mean, also eBay was like a new thing at this time because that's how old I am. But she was like, yeah, you got to go buy it on eBay. I'm sorry. And he's like, well, I'm here and I have the money and I want these boots and I want to wear them. And she's like, I know. And I wish I could just sell it to you, but you have to go buy it on eBay. And he's like, okay. So she won't let him buy it in store. And that is what this feels like, because it's like he saw the attack happening. He actually yells at the guy runs away. She has a chance and nobody comes. And that guy doesn't even walk his happy ass down his stairs or whatever to go fucking check on her. He felt that it was a big enough deal to yell, hey, leave her alone. But he doesn't even go check on her or like anything. I will never understand. So she's kind of trying to get it together. She's trying to make it somewhere for help. Meanwhile, police never come, an ambulance never comes. Nobody ever comes down to check on her. Nothing ever happens. So don't you know, this man that attacked her waited 10 minutes. And then he comes back for round 2. He attacks her again. So this time, because of where she had walked to, they weren't in view of the street like they had been before. He stabs Kitty again several times. Then he raped her, and he took $49 out of her wallet before fleeing the scene. Kitty is still alive at this point, but barely. Absolutely barely. Sophie Ferrer, a neighbor and friend of Kitty's, had heard the commotion and she ran out to comfort Kitty. And by this time, it's around 4 a.m., so about 30 minutes after the attack, that another neighbor, Carl Ross, had finally called the police. Patrolman Clarence Cron arrived shortly after the call, along with an ambulance. Unfortunately, it was too late, and Kitty passed away in the ambulance on the way to Queens General Hospital. Can you imagine being a person who loved Kitty? And just being told like, yeah, I mean, somebody yelled at the guy, but the guy waited like 10 minutes. You know, what were we supposed to do? Like, that's unimaginable. Marianne had to endure the process of identifying Kitty's body at the morgue and being interviewed by police. Marianne was the first person the detectives interviewed. She was eventually ruled out after hours of questioning her about her sexuality and relationship with Kitty. I mean, Guys, if we do a quick little canvass of the neighborhood, we know it wasn't Marianne. The police spoke with witnesses, and they did learn that they had seen Kitty's attacker get into his car after his initial attack, drive away, and then come back 10 minutes later. Yeah, I'm going to freak out. I'm going to glitch. I'm going to lose it. Oh, what do the kids say? I'm going to crash. I'm going to crash out. Okay. You saw him leave. You saw what kind of car he got into. You couldn't call the police and say, hey, I don't know if this is that big of a deal. You know, but there was this guy attacking this woman. She looked pretty bad off. I'm certainly not going to do anything to go check on her. That is a whole thing, as you well know. But I did see the kind of car he was driving, so maybe that might be helpful for you or something. And even if you didn't call then, when he drove his happy ass back, you could say, hey guys, it's me. Again, certainly not going to check on this woman. That is absolutely none of my business. But the guy's back. So I saw this guy. He attacked a woman. I saw him get in his car. I saw him drive away. But it's 10 minutes later now. He's coming back for her. So I feel like maybe somebody should come check it out. You know, certainly not going to be me. And I get it. If you think there's a guy with a knife out there, then okay, you don't want to run right up to him. Obviously, he could just stab you too. But you could make a phone call to the police, who that is their literal job. Right? But instead, we were just like, oh, yeah. Saw him do it the first time, saw him leave, saw him come back. I didn't see him do it the second time, but I assume that's exactly what he was about to do. Did I call? No. Was I worried? Not really. No, actually. It's really disappointing. Like, God, disappointing. That's an understatement. Anyway, so when he came back, he had a hat on. I've read reports that he had a hat on both times and that he just changed his hat. And I've read reports that he didn't have a hat on, but he put a hat on the second time. Either one of those, sir, is the exact phenomenon. It's a damn phenomenon that we have with like Superman, you know, with like the glasses and the no glasses. And you can't tell who he is. You just simply cannot tell. It also reminds me of Jackie Daytona and Laszlo in What We Do in the Shadows, where you can't tell it's Laszlo. It's Jackie Daytona because he put a toothpick in his mouth. He's literally unrecognizable. Like, my guy, this is not a great disguise, but here we are. Apparently, you don't even need one because you can just literally stab someone in the street, leave, and come back and complete what you were doing. But I don't understand it. So now he is wearing either a different hat or a hat. There was reportedly more than one call made to the police, but the records of the earliest calls are unclear and had not been given a priority. And I don't know what they said when they called, but those first couple of calls, for whatever reason, did not flag the police to actually go do something about it. One witness stated that his father had called the police after the first attack, reporting that a woman had been beat up, got up and was staggering around. So I guess if she got beat up but she's staggering around now, she must be fine. We just have to breathe through it, guys. Breathe through it. Okay. The investigation into Kitty's murder continued, but police were able to apprehend her killer 5 days after the murder occurred. A man named Winston Moseley was arrested during a burglary and confessed to murdering Kitty and 2 other women from Queens, 24-year-old Annie Mae Johnson and 15-year-old Barbara Kralik. Annie Mae Johnson had been shot and burned to death in her apartment that February in South Ozone Park, and Barbara Kralik had been stabbed in her parents' home in Springfield Gardens the July prior. Moseley had sexually assaulted both victims. However, he was never tried for either murder, despite having told police things that only the killer would know. He did testify at the trial of Alvin Mitchell, who had already been charged with Barbara Kralik's murder, and the conflicting accounts left the court with a hung jury. However, Mitchell was convicted at a second trial. I don't know this Mitchell, sir, but that sounds terrible. I don't know if he's done other things that he should be in jail for anyway, but like, Guys, what are we doing up there? Winston Moseley was born on March 2nd, 1935, in Manhattan to Fanny Moseley. Fanny's husband, Alphonse, was not Winston's biological father, but Winston did not know that fact until late childhood. Fanny and Alphonse were often separated, and it was said that though Winston was bright, he was troubled, obviously. He also had a fascination with ants, and I don't like that. That's really gross. What is it with the ants, my dude? Moseley married his first wife, Pauline, in 1954, but that did not last and they got a divorce. In 1961, he married Elizabeth Grant, a night shift hospital nurse. The couple had 2 children together, and his mother lived in their South Ozone Park home in Queens to assist with childcare. For work, Moseley operated machines in Mount Vernon, New York. Moseley is also a necrophiliac. I feel so disturbed. Like, why? I don't how do you know how do you find that out about yourself? Especially in the 50s and 60s. You can accidentally stumble upon some real disturbing shit on the internet. I still have never, even in all my research and all the work that I've done on a true crime podcast, I've never stumbled upon those types of things. But I know you can stumble upon some things that are like, ooh, I wish I hadn't seen that, or like, I don't know. So like, but he didn't even have that possibility. How do you find that out about yourself? Do you just have like, hey, I wonder what it would be like to, yikes. Winston Moseley told police that he would drive around late at night seeking out victims. Obviously. This is why I think there should be, at the very least, a male curfew. I mean, sometimes you lose your privilege. You know what I'm saying? Like, if my kids have access to a toy and they keep hitting their brother with it, I'm sorry, you've lost your privilege. That toy is going to go away right now. Do you see what I'm saying? Same thing. He stated that he'd killed 3 women, he'd raped 8, and had committed 30 or 40 burglaries. He said that on the morning of March 13th, 1964, he had been driving around looking for a victim when he saw Kitty driving home from work. He followed her to the parking lot of the train station, where she parked her car, and then he started following her on foot. When Kitty's neighbor had yelled for him to leave her alone, Moseley said that he had a feeling the man would shut his window and go back to sleep. And then he said, and sure enough, he did. And he did. He witnessed what he believed was a woman getting, at the very least, beat up. He said, stop that. Honestly, you're interrupting me. I would not have opened this window for any reason other than it is on my nerves that you are making whatever noise it is that you're making. She's screaming. That is really an inconvenience for me. So could you guys both be quiet? And then he went back to bed. Okay. He also said that he had realized that his car was parked where people could see it. So he went to move it some distance away. And then he changed out of his stocking cap to a wide-brimmed hat to cover his face before making his way back to where he had stabbed Kitty. He said in his testimony at trial, quote, I came back because I'd not finished what I had set out to do. I don't know if he specifically means the murder or the rape, because he hadn't finished either one. On March 23rd, 1964, Winston Moseley was indicted for first-degree murder. At trial, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. However, after 2 noted psychiatrists testified for the defense, the jury rejected that insanity defense and he was found guilty. On June 15, 1964, a separate sentencing proceeding took place before the same jury to determine whether the trial court should impose the death penalty. Then on July 6th, the jury recommended the sentence of death, and Justice J. Erwin Shapiro imposed that sentence. And after the court exploded in applause and Justice Shapiro regained control, he said, quote, I don't believe in capital punishment, but I must say I feel this may be improper when I see this monster. I wouldn't hesitate to pull the switch myself. And pull the switch because that was the electric chair. That was not lethal injection. That was I think we've all been traumatized by the Green Mile. My gosh. Moseley's attorney, Sidney Sparrow, immediately appealed the sentence, but it was upheld. He then appealed to the New York State of Appeals, but on June 1st, 1967, the Court of Appeals did affirm the conviction, but they set aside the sentence because the court had barred him from recalling the two psychiatrists to testify on Moseley's behalf before sentencing. Moseley was then sentenced to life in prison. In 1968, Moseley was in a Buffalo hospital for treatment for a self-inflicted wound when he overpowered a guard, took his gun, and fled. While on the run, Moseley took 5 hostages and raped a woman before being recaptured by the FBI, and he received 2 15-year sentences to run concurrently with his life sentence. Just remember all these things because this man has some audacity, okay? Moseley ended up obtaining a bachelor's degree in 1977 from Niagara University while incarcerated. After this, the New York Times did an op-ed article by him where he expressed regret for killing Kitty, stating that he was now a changed man. However, many people viewed the article as a way for him to lay the groundwork for him later seeking release in a series of parole hearings. They were all denied. He had lots of parole hearings. And then he ended up passing away in prison on March 28, 2016, at 81 years old. After Moseley's death, Kitty's brother, William, wrote a letter to the editor of the New York Times in response to their article about the case and Moseley's death. In it, he wrote that his death is maybe the final chapter in the tragic story of the events on March 13, 1964. He wrote, quote, "As my mother would have wished, my family's better angels do now express our condolences to the Moseley family. Most especially to the Reverend Stephen Moseley, one of Winston's sons, a man of faith, love, and courage, who struggled in his formative years with a Stalin and dilemma undeservedly forced into his being." He also wrote that he hopes that the spirit that he believes Kitty and Winston now reside in can help resolve the eternal question, what do we owe to all of our fellow beings? After Kitty's murder, the New York Times put out an article on March 14th, 1964, and it contained 4 paragraphs, and it was titled, "Queen's Woman is Stabbed to Death in Front of Home." 2 weeks later, they published a more extensive piece of Kitty's murder. However, it is now considered to be flawed. And this article is titled, "37 Who Saw Murder Didn't Call the Police." The article went on to say that for more than half an hour, quote, 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens in Queens watched a killer stalk and stab a woman in 3 separate attacks in Kew Gardens. However, this was an extremely exaggerated number of witnesses. There was no one who had seen the attack in full. Only a few people had witnessed some parts of it. Many witnesses stated that they had heard it, but thought it was either lovers or drunks quarreling. And there were 2 attacks, of course, not 3. Plus, there had been 2 people who did call the police. Now, I do want to say, there were some of the people said, oh, I just thought, I thought it was a lover's quarrel. Okay. And there are, of course, people who they don't want to get involved in other people's business. And I think if you see 2 people walking down the street and they're kind of like pissy with each other, raising their voices at each other even a little bit, you might just be like, that's none of my business, right? Like, that's their thing, whatever. I don't know what they're fighting about, like, whatever. But when you hear somebody screaming, help, he's stabbing me, I'm being stabbed, and screaming, from what I can tell, like she's being stabbed, that's not a lover's quarrel. And if it is, it's your business now. Like, I don't understand just letting it go. I don't understand being like, well, I just thought they were fighting, It's one thing to just hear like raised voices or whatever, but that's not what was happening. That's not what was happening. And I have to wonder, I don't know how I want to say this. I have to wonder what role, if it had been, I mean, I also think that if it had been two men arguing or whatever, people probably wouldn't call the police either because, we're raised to believe that men can handle themselves and stuff like that. Or you just don't want to get involved in other people's business and all this. There's so many things and reasons, like societally, that make it so that if you see something that's concerning, you may not want to make a phone call. And we'll talk about that more. But I do think that this also came at a time when if a man, wanted to beat his wife, most people weren't going to say anything about it. They might be like, ooh. There was still, women weren't property at this time, but there were still so many things that women could not do, that women were not allowed to do. And, we know well that marital rape was not outlawed in all 50 states until I believe it was 1993. Stalking, took a long time. So it's like, there are so many things that were just societally. I mean, Kitty had to hide her relationship with her girlfriend. So it just, it was a whole thing. This article, though, was what people believed and took as fact. And I will tell you, for a very long time, I believe if you said the name Kitty Genovese, just being like in the true crime community and like being interested in true crime, I knew about this case way, 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 way before we covered it. And I recognized it so much so that I had to double check that we hadn't already covered it, but we hadn't. It's a really well-known case, but I always believed for many, many years that 38 people saw her get murdered and nobody said anything. And that's simply not what happened. And it's just been taken as fact. I was watching the parts of the Karen Reed, not the trial, it was a motion by the defense today, a pretrial motion. Anyway, the prosecutor said, and I thought this was a very good line, a lie unchecked becomes fact. Now, I don't know that I agree with him as far as, what he's arguing in the court as being a lie unchecked that became fact. But I think the sentiment is, I thought it was very well said. And that's what this is. A lie unchecked became fact. There have been studies, investigations, films, books, and more done on this case based on the knowledge that 38 people watched her get murdered and didn't say anything, did not make one phone call. And that went on for many years, even after the errors were pointed out and debunked. According to an article in the New York Times written by Robert D. McFadden in 2016, which we used that article a lot for this episode, psychologists and criminologists called the reluctance of witnesses to get involved the bystander effect, or the Kitty Genovese syndrome. And studies determined that people in a crowd were less likely to step forward to help a victim. People are more likely to help when alone than in the company of others. Several other psychological studies were done after this about helping behavior, and it also contributed to the development of Good Samaritan laws. And there are lots and lots of reasons for this. And there was one study that they did where they had like one person in a room, and then two people in a room, and then three people in a room. And then they pumped smoke into the room. And when there was just one person in the room, they called for help. When there was two people, they were more likely to call for help than with three. And when there were three people in the room, they were much less likely to call for help. And I think part of that comes from, because that bystander effect is, well, if it was really bad, somebody would call. So somebody must be calling. Like if it's bad, then somebody will call. Or it's, they're probably getting a ton of calls. I don't want to add to it. But I think some of that, especially with like the smoke in the room situation, is you will kind of look around to your surroundings and be like, well, if they're not worried, then maybe I shouldn't worry. Like, it seems like nobody else is worried. So I guess it's okay. Like maybe I am worried about something that I shouldn't be. Maybe I am overreacting. If everybody else starts to worry, then I'll start to worry, kind of thing. Either way, it's concerning. But there are lots of different factors in that. And again, this was not a situation where 38 people watched her get murdered and they didn't do anything. However, the people that did see stuff, I mean, that's a problem. And you need to make a phone call and you need to do what you need to do. Bill, Kitty's brother, made it his mission later in life to determine if, in fact, 38 people had witnessed his sister's murder and did nothing. So he spent 10 years working on the film / the documentary The Witness with director James Solomon. And according to Bill, the Genovese family essentially buried any talk of his sister with her because it was too hard on his mother to talk about it. After both of his parents passed away, he decided it's time for answers. In his research, he learned that Kitty's neighbor had been with her while waiting for the ambulance. The family did not know that. And that was something that he wished that he had known sooner and that he could have told his parents. While doing the documentary and research, Bill concluded that the narrative was not true and that those who did see something and didn't call don't hold blame. Very mature of him to be able to come to that conclusion. He says, 1964 was a different time. He told People magazine, quote, "I've come to realize that the whole story of Kitty's death will never be known, but maybe that's why the story continues to fascinate people. And if nothing else, it got us to think about what we owe to each other." However, after Kitty's murder, many communities organized neighborhood watch patrols. Later in 1964, in New York, they simplified how to make an emergency call to police. Instead of dialing 0 for an operator or precinct or borough headquarters, there was one central police number. It was not until 1968 that the unified 911 system was established. The first catalyst for this was in 1957 when the National Association of Fire Chiefs recommended the use of a single number to report fires. In 1967, the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice recommended that a single number should be established for reporting emergencies nationwide. In November of 1967, the FCC met with American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T. I was today years old when I learned that's what it stood for, to find a way to establish a universal emergency number that could be implemented quickly. And in 1968, AT&T announced that it would establish the digits 911 as the emergency numbers throughout the U.S. The first 911 call was placed on February 16, 1968 by Alabama Speaker of the House, Tom Bevel, a United States representative, where they exchanged greetings. This was in Haleyville, Alabama, and this proved that the 911 call concept worked. In an interview in 2016, Marianne Zelenko, I keep wanting to say Zelenko said, quote, "I felt, wow, she was so close and I was sleeping and I didn't know what happened and that I could have saved her, That's what I really think still." When she spoke of meeting Kitty in an interview in 2004, she said they meshed. She was quiet and Kitty talked a lot. They had both struggled with their sexuality and they had a quick bond. She said that after Kitty's murder, she resolved to not turn her back when she saw someone in distress. She describes a time when she was driving home from work and saw a man and woman arguing on the side of the road. The man hit the woman, so Marianne pulled her car over, got out, and asked the woman if she needed help. In response, the woman ran right into her car and Marianne drove her home. She says she never saw the woman again and, quote, "I could have just driven by that night, but I said, I'll take a chance." That is so moving. I mean, because she's firsthand been a victim as well of, I don't want to get involved in other people's business. And sure, you don't want to walk around being like, what are you talking about? Well, what are you taking amoxicillin for? But if you see something like that, a domestic dispute where somebody hits another person, hey, is everything okay? Because now I'm not saying go up and talk to everybody and see what they're doing, but just having been in an abusive relationship myself, my boyfriend was much less likely to say or do things around other people. And especially if a man called him out, he certainly didn't apologize or anything like that, but he would act like nothing was happening, and he would lock it up. So I don't know. Marianne went on to live a full life with her partner, Rebecca Jones. And Marianne died in April of 2024 of aspiration pneumonia. Gosh, But that is the Kitty Genovese case. Let me know your thoughts about it. Were you familiar with this case already? Did you also think that the 38 witnesses was a fact? I definitely did for quite a long time. So I think this just kind of really shows us that, like, if we can learn something from every case that we cover, sometimes it is a self-preservation, tip. Sometimes it is things to look out for. Sometimes it's, just vigilance. Sometimes it's, it's different things. But I think in this case, the big takeaway can be, if you see somebody in need, do something about it. If it is something that would put your own life in danger, we have a 911 system now. Make the phone call, because that's what they're there for. And yeah, you might call something in that ended up not being as bad or whatever. But I mean, certainly if you hear somebody screaming, "I'm being stabbed, please help me." I just still will never understand the, like, all right, well, the noise stopped, I'll just go back to bed. I don't understand it, but Bill has made peace with it. And I think that if we just take that knowledge and move forward and resolve, just like Mary Ann did, to make sure that we are aware when other people need help and do something to help them, then, we'll be making progress. So that's it for today. I love you guys. I'll catch you next time. Bye. If you liked this episode, be sure to like this episode and follow the show so that you never miss out on new episodes. Get in on the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. You can find us at Killer Queens Pod, or you can join our Facebook discussion group at Killer Queens Podcast, where we discuss cases covered on the show and all things 90s. If you want to submit a case to be covered on the show, visit killerqueenspodcast.com/case submission and just complete the form. And if we cover the case, we'll give you a shout out on the show. Lilas.